So for the blasters, they are a little bit different than the rest of the critters because they're not being created by the game controller. So when I create a scene, I actually create a controller. So in the splash scene, I'm creating the computer controller, CB controller, and in the level 1 scene, I'm creating the player controller. And the controllers create the blaster. So in the attractor mode, it creates a computer controller, and it creates the blaster, and it basically just controls the blaster and tells it to always shoot. Whereas the player controller moves the blaster based on the arrow keys, and then it tells the blaster to shoot when you hit spacebar. So the blaster that has a factory, so it gets destroyed. And then what it did for shooting was when I create the bullet, I created two methods in the factory. So when I create the splash screen the first time, I call create bullet, which when you create the bullet, it checks if there's a bullet already created. If there's not, it creates one bullet. So then whenever you hit spacebar, or whenever the computer controller is just calling fire bullet, it's calling the factory's fire bullet. And what that's doing is checking, it's basically just trying to fire off of the stack. So it can only shoot a bullet when there's a bullet there. So you're trying to shoot and there's nothing there, nothing happens until the bullet gets destroyed because it goes off screen or hits something. Then it gets recycled, and since there's something in the stack again, you can then shoot it. So that's like my way of keeping track of one bullet that I thought was kind of different and I liked it. But otherwise, that would be the diagram. So now to start going through some more of my code a little more in depth. So we'll start with the blaster. So the blaster, like I said, is not control its own movement. So the update does nothing because the controller is doing all that work. So all it's doing is it's drawing. It's got all its collisions with different enemies, and then it has its player death. So when the player dies, it tells the controller that it lost a life, and then the controller has to keep track if it has 1 or 2 lives because it draws the two blasters in the top left for your life, and then it tells the game controller to create a new wave at the wave that it's currently at, and then it tells the controller to create a new blaster since this blaster is being destroyed. However, if it's your last life, it will check if your points are higher than the high score points, and if so, it'll send you to the high score screen. Otherwise, it'll send you back to the attractor mode or the splash screen, and it'll nullify that hull in the points manager HUD. Sorry, the hull. It'll nullify that HUD in the points manager so that the points manager is not still trying to draw to a HUD that does not exist. So moving on, we have the blaster factory. So all of my factories are recycling factories. I'll probably show off this one and like the Centipede one just to show off a couple. However, they're all very similar. So they're all singletons. They create they're all singletons, as you can see here. They create a blaster if there's not one in the stack, and they do, you know, what factories do. They recycle. However, for my bullet, so this just moves upwards until it hits the end of the screen, and it's got collisions with everything. However, this one's factory, as you can see, has the create bullet. So if it's empty, it creates a bullet, and it sets that external management. And then fire bullet is what I'm trying to do when I fire. So it's basically checking if it's not empty to fire that bullet. And so if it's not empty, it'll fire a bullet. If it is empty though, it just doesn't do anything. So that's how I made it so you can only have one bullet on a screen at a time. So then continuing, we'll go into the Centipede. So like I said before, there's the master, which is above the other two. So this one has direction, and it's got all of the pointers and everything to the field. So this is the Centipede movement. So both the body and the head will call this every update to move. And what it's doing is it's checking what rotation it's at, setting its rotation. So if it needs to be turning, it'll be turning every step or every update. And then it's just doing your position y times the y direction times move y. So move y is just these are the values that I change depending on what direction you're moving. So if I'm turning, this will be 0 and this will be 1. So it'll allow you to actually move in that direction. But if I'm just moving straight, this will be 0, this will be 1, so that it's just moving to the right and you're not moving up and down. So this is also then, this is tell me. So the body calls this to figure out what the head's previous movements were, and it sets it to their movement so that it knows where to go. And then behind me, like I said before, it's just calling forward to tell that thing to have a pointer backwards. So it's just passing itself on to whatever's in front of it to have so it has a pointer backwards. And then I have the create new head function, which when you shoot the middle of a centipede, it creates a new head. So first of all, it'll check if there's anything behind it, so that it can create a head behind it. And if it can, it'll create a new head. And then that new head gets all of the aspects of what that body part was, so that it knows what direction it's supposed to be moving, what its position is, what animation step it's in, so it's facing the right direction, all of that. And then it nullifies all the pointers and creates new ones, so that I'm not missing pointers when I create new heads. And then it sets that body part that it's replacing to be destroyed. So then if I move on to the centipede head, you can see that in the update, it's just calling that move centipede, passing itself in, and then when it gets to a step, it's going to check its position with position check, and it's going to check if it should need to be turning. So those two are down here. So the turn check is going to check if it's poisoned. If it's poisoned, it's going to constantly just keep turning. Whereas if it's not, it'll check if it's at the end of the screen, if it's a new head. It needs to set up some stuff if it's a new head the first time it gets to a step, so that's why that's there. But otherwise, if it hits the end of the screen, it'll turn. If it runs into a mushroom, it'll turn. Same way if it's going the other direction. Then there is the position check. Position check checks to make sure if you don't hit the bottom of the screen, and if you do, it keeps you inside of the player area so that you do not leave that player area and you move up and down into that player area at the bottom of the screen. After that, it just has collision with bullet. So if it's a collision with a bullet, it needs to check if there's anything behind it, and if there is, then it needs to create a new head because it's splitting the centipede then. And then it just needs to remove one from the centipede length and from the game controller so it knows there's one less centipede body left. It needs to add a mushroom in its position, and it needs to add points to the points manager. Next, we have the body. So centipede body is very similar. It has its initialize, which is just setting up all its values. It calls the move sent this, but instead of checking in here, all it does is it calls, it sets its pre-move to move, just like the centipede head does, but it calls the tell me. So it asks the thing in front of it, which is M, what position it just moved to in its previous position, sets that as its next move, so that when it gets to its next step, it'll move that direction, and the thing behind it will move to its previous direction. And if there's a collision with a bullet, it does the same thing as the head, where it has to figure out if there's anything behind it, and if there's not, it doesn't create a new head. If there is, it creates a new head, and it adds points, adds a mushroom, all that jazz. So the last thing to show when the Centipede would be the one of the factories. Just like before, they're all very similar. They're singletons, and this is just a normal one. So just checks if there's one there. If there's not, creates a new one, puts it into the recycled items, and if there is, it takes one off the top and creates a new one. However, since this one is an odd creature, it has the destroy all creatures ability. So this one actually keeps track with a list of how many heads there are. It does the same thing for the bodies. So if I go over to Centipede body, I keep track of how many there are, so that if I want to destroy them in between waves, I just call this destroy all centipedes, and it will go through and it'll find them all and it'll mark them all for destroy, so that it can destroy all the objects that are on screen. It does the same thing for the spider and the scorpion and the flea. So I'm not going to show those factories because they're all the same thing. So then we have the controllers. So for the controller, it just sets up how many lives you have and how many lives to remove when you lose a life. I did this so that when the computer's playing, it doesn't remove any lives, and when the player's playing, it will remove lives. Other than that, the over class is very simple. However, then you get into the actual controllers. So the computer controller is just moving based on your speed, what direction in the X and Y you're moving, and if it wants to move at all. So if this will be a 0 or a 1, just if it wants to pause, it's always shooting, which is why it's always calling Bullet Factory fire bullet at the blaster's position. And it is just going to, after a step, check if it's hitting the bottom or the top of the screen in that player area, the player area screen, and then it's going to set position every time it updates. Then we've got the player controller, which is going to be drawing those two players up in the top left for how many lives you have left. And in the update, it's going to be keeping track of if you're pushing keys and then moving your player there. So you can see like the blaster position is being switched because I'm creating the blaster up in the initialization of the controllers so that I have pointers to them so I can set their positions based in the controllers. So next we have the critters. Start off with the flea. So in the flea, we have the update, which is going to check if move is 1. So if move is 1, that means it's going to be going down screen, which means that down here it checked that the flea check, which is the player area's mushroom amount, is less than the amount that the flea is supposed to spawn at. If it does, it plays the sound. It sets that move to 1, so that the flea then moves down the screen and is trying to spawn. It spawns at a random position at the top of the screen, moves down the screen, and it is trying to add mushrooms at every position it hits on a chance. So when it tries to add mushrooms, it has a chance of 1 in 3 to add a mushroom at its position. It actually spawns them right behind it, because otherwise, when you're trying to shoot the flea, sometimes you'll hit the mushroom instead of the flea. So I put it spawning right behind it so that if you're shooting at that flea, you're always hitting that flea instead of the mushroom. And if you collide with the bullet once, it'll set your damage to true, which will increase your speed. And then if you're damaged, it will destroy you and stop your sound and add points for the player. And if you collide with the blaster, it destroys the blaster and all of that. Then we've got the scorpion, which just spawns at a random position on the left or the right. And then it calls respawn. So what respawn does is it picks a random spot left or right, picks a position based on this max height plus between 5 and that max height, so that it's not at the top of the screen, but it's not it's somewhere in the middle. And then it picks a side, and it just goes straight across, and whenever it collides with a mushroom, which I believe is